Whoa, a lot of people. Well, you can drink as much beer as you'd like. Yeah, with measure, please. And you can eat, of course. I'm very happy to have you here. It is so awesome to be able to host events that promote diversity. That's the main idea of our ERG. So who am I? My name is Catalina Laverde. I'm from Colombia, born and raised. I moved here when I was 18 years old. And I work as a backend software engineer here at Spotify. But on top of that, I'm also one of the colleagues for our employee resource group for Latinx, our Latinx community. I also want to thank my other colleague, Maria. She's somewhere in here. And Adriana, she's not here. And we planned this awesome event for you on how to navigate the tech workplace as a Latinx. And we have an amazing panel prepared for you. So why are we here? Of course, when I started engineering, well, that was like about 10 years ago. But working professionally at Spotify, I realized that I was the only woman. And while I was in school, I would walk into this room with like 100 people, and there would be only like 3 women. And that can be very intimidating and isolating, and it was very, very hard to make friends. But you know, it's that thing that you kind of get used to. The thing you just assume, oh, that's just the way it's going to be. It's always going to be intimidating. I'm always going to look a little bossy if I cannot raise my voice or speak up, and I'm just going to get used to it. But then, by being in a culture that is so inclusive here at Spotify, I realized that that's not the way it's supposed to be, and that we need to do something about it, which is why the priority of this event is to empower you and to show you that we have so much potential as Latinx, and we should bring it to a workplace. So that's the purpose. Thank you so much for coming. And I would like to introduce David. David is the lead of Techqueria. Round of applause. I met David last year during our Hispanic Heritage Month, which goes from September 15 and October 15. By the way, we're going to have awesome events this year, so I'm going to be promoting them. You're all on our list now, so I'll be sending you all the invites. And he came to our events, and he came out with a great idea. You know why I have this great community in San Francisco, and I also want to build a community here in New York. He is the lead of the largest community of Latinx in tech in the United States. So we decided to make this event happen for you. So David's going to tell you a little more about Techqueria. Welcome, and thank you to our AV support, Carolina. She's also the only girl in the IT team here. So a round of applause. Enjoy.
Gracias. Hi, thank you everybody for coming. I think Catalina said most of what I wanted to say, and I don't want to bore you a lot, but we are just recently studying Techqueria in New York. In San Francisco, we have like monthly meetups. We have like a very big community of active people. We have smaller like mentoring circles where we get people together to help each other on their careers, get jobs, interview, especially people also that are learning to code or that are trying to learn new skills. And we're trying to launch a lot of these new initiatives also in New York. So if you're interested in volunteering or helping out, or your company likes hosting events, find me. What else? We have like this website thing where you can ask questions to the panelists so that you don't have to like raise your hand and it's a little more fair. So if you go to slido.com and put the code C781, you can like see the list of questions, and yeah, you can come up with questions over time, and at the end of like this. And at the end of the panel, there'll be like a Q&A, and they'll answering that. It's like super easy to use. You're all techies. Y ahora los dejo con Tatiana. Sigue.
Hi, is this on? Yes! Hi, everyone. Thank you so much all for coming. Just wanted to start out by thanking Spotify, especially Latinx at Spotify, Catalina, Adriana, Maria, and the rest of the team. Thank you so much for giving us this platform, providing us with the space and the opportunity to have these meaningful conversations. So yes, David explained a little bit about Slido, so please use that. Keep your questions coming. As you think of something, put it on there, and we'll be sure to ask the panelists those questions. So I'm going to sit here, and let's meet our wonderful panelists. I'll call them out one by one and have them join us here. So we have Paola Mata. Welcome her up to the stage. And please take a seat wherever you like. Jorge Torres. Rebecca Carr. And Angela Medina. I guess we could all start. So, you know, my first question is just very simple so that the audience could get to know you a little bit more. And I know that your bios were already on the page, and I'm sure everyone read them. But if you can just, you know, give us a quick synopsis of your background and tell us one interesting thing that wasn't on your bio.
Hello? Okay, there we go. So I'm Paola. I'm an iOS engineer at BuzzFeed. I also have a background in community organizing. For about 4 years, I ran a community for Latinas in tech here in New York. And I'm also currently an advisor to the IO Soho group, which is the largest iOS meetup in New York.
Thank you. I guess we'll go this way.
Hola, mi gente. How you guys doing? Thanks, Spotify, the ERG group, and Techqueria for inviting me here. My name is Jorge Torres, born in the Bronx, but raised in Queens, Flushing. Parents are from Ponte, Puerto Rico. Any Boricuas in the audience? Yeah. Nice. Well, y'all are some quiet Boricuas. Not what we're known for, but I guess that's okay. We're inclusive. So my background is in biophysics, intellectual property law, and most recently venture capital. Most recently affiliated with Silas Capital, which is a consumer-focused firm here in New York that I helped to start. I am currently teaching and working on my next venture capital firm with an amazing organization that is working to diversify the ranks of VCs in this country called hbcu.vc. So check it out and ask me all about it. I'd be happy to share more. And one interesting thing.
Yeah, that we can tell from your bio, or you didn't share in your bio.
My favorite cookie is the rainbow cookie.
Good to know.
Not because we're at a DNI event, but it really is.
Thanks, Jorge. We have Rebecca.
Hi, I'm Rebecca. I'm co-founder at Beatbox. Beatbox is a monthly subscription box service. We make STEAM education accessible to all schools. And if you don't know what STEAM stands for, it's science, technology, engineering, art, and math. Used to be STEM. They keep adding letters. Now there's art, so it's STEAM. I have a background in teaching. I got my degree in early childhood education. I grew up in upstate New York. My family's from Bayamon, Puerto Rico. I'm currently, in addition to being co-founder at Beatbox, I am still teaching in schools across Manhattan, teaching a seed-to-table curriculum, teaching children about where food comes from and planting and cooking and healthy nutrition. And a fun fact, let's see. I'm going to Peru tomorrow. I'm hiking 4 days to Machu Picchu. Yeah.
Thank you, and you still managed to be here. Thanks so much. And Angela.
Hi, guys. I'm Angela. I was born and raised in Colombia. Are there any Colombians here in the public? Yeah. Born and raised in Colombia. Went to college in Florida. I have a background in advertising. Worked for agencies for a little while. Then moved to the Bay Area, work in tech. And then after that, I moved here to New York last year in August. I work at Updater. They're looking to centralize all the moving tasks into one platform. And before that, I was at TechCrunch. So I did a little bit of media, agency, and now back in tech again. So that's me. Fun fact about me. I watched like all episodes of Game of Thrones last year in like a month. That's a fun fact.
Pretty incredible. Thank you. So before we ask the questions, we also want to get to know a little bit of the audience. If you can just raise your hand, because here we have a wonderful panel that really reflects even more diversity. We have, people across designing, development, VC, technology, a founder. Raise your hand if you're a designer developer. All right. If you're in venture capital, oh, need to increase those numbers there. Okay. If you're a founder, woo! If you're an engineer of any sort, all right. And anything, what have I left out? Nurse. Woo! Healthcare. Artist. Digital strategy. See? Finance. Ops. Great. Thanks. All right, so let's start off with talking about a personal experience about your Latinx identity that has impacted what you do at your job. So who wants to start off with that?
I'll start off.
Sure, thanks.
So I think that my experience, if it's okay to just kind of literally flip that, I think that my work has impacted my identity rather than my identity impacting my work. I think it actually happened in reverse. So because my work involves making sure that children have access to nutrition education and science and technology and education and art and math and everything, we've actually found ourselves in a lot of schools in areas of poverty, in areas where there's food deserts. I mean, there's not a grocery store for a mile or at least a half-hour subway ride. The best option is a 7-Eleven. And these schools actually have a lot of funding for the Latin community and for obesity awareness. And just visiting these schools and talking to the teachers and seeing the kids, a lot of them are from the Latinx community. And just seeing these children and their lack of opportunity has kind of driven my mission a little bit more, for sure, in making sure that quality education is for everybody. Not just for really nice private schools on the Upper West Side. You know, everybody can have this high-quality education experience.
Interesting, thank you. So any other experiences in terms of your Latinx identity that impacted you?
So mine is not as deep as yours. That was pretty deep. But I think when I moved here, I was very self-conscious about my accent, about having typos, so I would actually triple check my emails when I started like having my first real jobs, and I think that really pushed me to start reading more, getting better at writing, being like more aware of like how I pronounce things, but in the process I think it's fun to just like make fun of yourself as you're learning, but yeah, I think as a Latino that as an immigrant that just moved here. I grew up and I was born and raised in Colombia. Like my first language is Spanish. You become really aware of like those things, and you work harder to, I guess, you work harder to like be recognized for what you do as a Latino that has an accent and that makes mistakes. I don't think a lot of Americans are very like self-conscious about their typos, and there's a lot of Americans that make a ton of mistakes, and I'm like, But yeah, I think I became really self-conscious and insecure at first. Not so much anymore because I really pushed myself into becoming better at that.
Thank you for sharing that.
Sure.
So I've had a formative experience that influences not only how I work, but how I manage my career. So I've always been in fields where I was pretty much the only Latino in the room, whether it was science or law and definitely venture capital. But I was fortunate in my legal career to have a mentor who was Puerto Rican, born and raised in the Bronx, and impacted the careers of many, many attorneys. But there came a point when I got out of law school, he asked me, what are you practicing? And I told him patent law, which is a field that not only requires a law degree, but also a technical background. So when you think about how many of us are in the intersection of those two circles, it's very few. And he told me, I cannot mentor you because I know nothing about patent law. You're going to have to look beyond me and certainly beyond people who look like us and who share our community and who come from our background. And the learning out of that was that sometimes the mentor that you need and that is going to help you does not come from your community. You may have to go out and find someone who is an ally, but who doesn't look like you for that. So not only, that's sort of how I think, still continue to think about looking for mentors, because you can always look for mentors, but I have built mentoring into my job description for every job that I have, because while it may be strategic to look beyond your community, I think it's important to sort of be someone who mentors other Latinos in whatever I happen to be doing.
Great, thank you.
So I've heard a lot of stories from other women, as particularly in the tech industry, who have mentioned how maybe they tried to minimize their Latinx identity, perhaps because of wanting to fit in, and maybe that's something that stands out. I've actually had the opposite experience. I think I actually became involved with organizing for the Latinas in tech community. Before, like while I was still learning engineering, and I think I put it out there like very publicly when I was interviewing and looking for jobs, and I think that actually made me a more interesting, appealing candidate because I was because I had that community behind me. Whereas I think when I got hired at BuzzFeed, there was like one other Latino in the engineering department, and I think at some point they like gathered us and. They were, it wasn't just us. It was like just we had someone who was working on diversity and inclusion, and they just asked us questions about how they can make us feel more included, and like just what our experience was like. So I feel that in some ways I've become like sort of this resource at my office for understanding the Latinx community.
Excellent, thank you. So what characteristics do members of the Latinx community have that you feel can strengthen the tech industry? Maybe you can go this way now.
Okay, so this is something I thought about a lot because I think Angela and I had this conversation maybe last week, and we were thinking like maybe there isn't a quality that's like unique specifically to Latinos, but we do bring like our culture and into everything we do, our identities. And I think that one thing that I would say stands out for me is that desire for community and connection that we have, that I think comes probably from having like a strong family background. And I think that's it's been proven, especially in like recent studies, how like the importance of like connection and empathy makes for stronger teams. And I think like that's something that we definitely, I wouldn't say it's an advantage, but I say like we have a lot of experience in it.
So I would say, if you look at our community, we over-index on immigrants, right? And as someone who works with early stage, founders of early stage companies, I look for ganas, right? And our community, disproportionately has and understands the concept of ganas. Does everyone know what I'm talking about? Right? That hunger, that coming here, no going back, do or die, have no other option to other than to be successful in this country. That I think, that entrepreneurial sort of spirit is so alive in our community more than I think any other community. So that gives our community a disproportionate competitive advantage, I think, and certainly defines the Latino entrepreneurs that I've had the opportunity to work with.
Yeah, that work ethic, huh?
Yeah, so I think, Jorge, you hit the nail right on the head with that one. The drive within the community, the work ethic. And I think that, most of us might agree that the Latinx community, we're pretty captivating people, right? The Spanish language is pretty beautiful, and we have a lot of strong, smart opinions. And I think that that's something that we all definitely bring into the table a little bit.
I completely agree with you guys. I think there's definitely a strong connection with the word sacrifice and being an immigrant, especially if you come from a blind American country. I feel like if you come from a developing country, you are constantly on survival mode, and you prepare for it, and you prepare to hustle, and you prepare to figure out what you don't know. So yeah, I 100% agree with you. We're ready to kill it and to do our best, because if we come from a working class family, we have that pressure to be better than our parents were, and again, the connection with like sacrifice and being someone and being successful in the States. I think that there's definitely a connection there, and that's how we can definitely impact the tech community. We have that strength.
Yes.
Although I think what's really when I think about strength, I think there isn't anything unique to Latins. I think what brings strength is just like the collaboration and like just bringing people from that have different perspectives on anything, like different cultures, different races, different ethnic groups. So there isn't just like bring a bunch of Latinos to your community, to your company. I think it's just having a good mix of everyone. So yeah.
Great, thank you. Yeah, and I think just now we are hearing about how we're navigating different cultures, how we're navigating different languages, and coming to a new environment. And definitely, being in the tech space, that's even another new frontier. We talk about being the only Latinos in the room. So how have you, in your experience, navigated being the only Latinx in your company or in your organization? Is it, yes?
So I recently, like within the last couple of years, discovered this term, emotional labor. Have people heard of this term? So my good friend is an amazing journalist, Tanzina Vega, Puerto Rican from New York, and she's done a lot of reporting on this question of the disparate burdens that people of color face in the workplace by virtue of the fact of being the only one. And so, my experience ranges from being asked to answer for my community, to people. I haven't experienced as much sort of out and out, I think, sort of like overtly racialized comments, but also sort of the labor of being the person to start the ERG, the person to recruit all the Latinos. So not only is it emotionally burdensome, but it is a huge tax on your time. And so the tricky thing for us, I think, is sort of carrying that water for our companies, either because we want to be good employees or because we truly believe in the mission, but sort of still progressing our own careers, because a lot of the things we get asked to do, which may be good things in themselves, because of the burden, end up distracting from our progression in the company. Because frankly, companies do not reward us enough for doing the things that we do to help diversify our companies. And I know some people have just said, don't ask me to be on a panel about diversity anymore unless you are committed to radically diversifying the workforce. Don't ask me to go back to my schools to recruit Latinos unless you're committed to radically increasing the numbers of people from those schools that you're going to hire, not just interview. So some other people have more room and are more willing to carry that burden. But the point is, I think that it's a real burden for some of us.
Great, yeah. Anyone else?
Yeah. So I, following up on being like, I believe I was like the second Latina person to be hired. It was actually pretty funny. It was a Dominican male, and I don't know how we ended up like sitting exactly next to each other for the first year. I don't know if that was intentional, like put the two brown people together. But I'm really glad. I'm really glad because like he's like probably one of my favorite people at the company. But I think that need for community was there, and I think it's still there for me. Thankfully, like I was already involved with like organizing the Latina community, so I had that. But also, we somehow all managed to find each other. So maybe not in engineering, but in other parts of the company, because BuzzFeed has like it had at the time BuzzFeed Español. Like we all found each other, and I feel like out of that came like an unofficial ERG. We would meet and all like make time to hang out with each other, and now there's an official one, and like we already had a head start on it, which is great. And every time, and I mean every single time, because right now I'm the only woman on my team, and I have been for a while. And I'm definitely the only Latina. Anytime that, we have like unofficial lunches even, or we have events, every single time I feel like, oh, like I needed this, like I've been needing this, and I think it's important to make time for that, and just like the fact that like the company supports things like that is awesome. But even if your company doesn't come into events like this is awesome, like having that community, which is why like I was striving for so long to have that there for people to have that moment of like feeling like, oh, this is where I can be myself. This is where I can, feel comfortable with my people.
Great, thank you. We're going to get to, we hear a lot about community and strengthening community. We're going to get to that a little bit later in our chat, but wanted to give you guys a chance to respond if at all.
Yeah, so I think you and I were talking about this a little bit before we came up here. So I'm half Puerto Rican, and a lot of the times I'll tell people I'm Puerto Rican, and they'll say, oh, I thought you were white, or oh, I thought you were Italian, or oh, you look this. And I'm like, okay, thank you, great. And, I think because of that, I'm fortunate and privileged enough to say that I have not experienced a lot of bias. So for me, listening to you guys talk and listening to other people, I think the best thing that I can contribute to this question is just being an ally, being there for anyone who is going through being the only person in the room that feels uncomfortable. I think it's important to have somebody that can, slide a chair over, or just say, I get it, or just, be that important ally with them.
Great.
Yeah.
I'm trying to think this one. I think, when I was in Miami, that definitely wasn't an issue. There was a lot of Latinos at the agencies that I worked at. So we would all, speak in Spanish. So the minority was actually the white people. But back in San Francisco, when I worked in tech, I think the first thing that people assume of you when you have lunch with your coworkers is like, oh, you're Latina, you like spicy food. No, guess what? No, I don't like spicy food. But I think, you learn to not take things personally and just like educate people about things. No, actually, I'm from Colombia. We don't we like, spice, like, ají and, our empanadas, but not the Mexican level spicy, or,
There's different spice
Peruvians like spicy a lot, spicy food a lot. So you take that as an opportunity to educate people and teach them about your culture, and teach them more, about where you come from, and how things are done there, and teach them about, like, stop stereotyping. I would get a lot, oh, you're Colombian, so you're drug lord and Escobar and and again, don't take it personal. You just, make fun of it for a little bit and like start educating people, and take that as an opportunity to educate people. So that's what I've experienced, being the only Latina in, tech companies in San Francisco, now here in New York.
Great, thank you. So you given us a good tactic on how to kind of counteract some of that unconscious bias, and sometimes that could just be lack of exposure. You say educate, take every opportunity to educate. What are some other things that we can do to kind of minimize or mitigate that unconscious bias in the workplace?
So I like to give people the benefit of the doubt. I think that there are a lot of good people out there. Right now, everything seems so divisive and terrible and everything, but I think people are good. And I think that if somebody has said something hurtful or harmful to you, it takes 30 seconds to pull them aside privately and say, this is what you said. I found it to be harmful to our work dynamic or to our friendship. And I think that 9 times out of 10, hopefully you'll find that the person is apologetic, and it's an opportunity for education, like what you said, and to move forward, and for them to also become an ally. So I think that's a good way to start, is to just having one-on-one kind of brave, bold conversations with people.
Great, and it seems like people appreciate that, you coming to them first, right?
Oh, yeah. I don't think the best way to handle it is to CC 50 people on an email what, Sherry from accounting said to you in line at Chipotle. I think that, it's best to keep it private. I mean, of course, take issues to HR when needed, but I think, like I said, most people want to learn and want to do better and want to get along with their coworkers, and, make the bottom line better at the end of the day.
Great, yeah.
I think the big difficulties in tech outside of large companies, if you're talking about early stage companies, and certainly in the venture capital industry, there is no HR function, right? There is no one to go to complain to or to report to if you detect someone's bias, right? You asked the questions about unconscious bias, which is a little bit even touchier because you're dealing potentially with a colleague, an investor, a potential partner who's not even aware of the fact that they are operating and doing business under a bias that's really having an impact in the workplace. So what do you do? My own personal opinion is that the more sort of walking counter stereotypes that exist, the better we are able to combat people's unconscious biases. Because by very definition, people are not even, it's like the goldfish in the goldfish bowl. The goldfish doesn't realize it's in water until it's on the floor flapping around. It's like, oh wow, I've been surrounded by water my whole life, right? And so the equivalent of that experience is seeing a Black Latina as a partner in a venture firm, right? Or seeing that that gay Latino founder kill it in the pitch meeting, right? So how do we get to that point? Again, my thing is mentoring and setting up and centering those folks up for success, whatever I can do. I also think there are ingrained institutional problems that we have to combat. So in my industry, the biggest problem around diversity and inclusion, as I see it, is the segregation of capital, right? And so one of the things I am working on is to desegregate capital allocation, with the hopes that frees up capital to people who don't traditionally get it, who look like us, who come from our backgrounds.
Great, thank you. And Paola, it seems like you wanted to jump in there too.
I don't have any negative experiences as far as like unconscious biases. I have recently our company decided to give this training on it for anyone who's involved in hiring, which I have been. I've been in the position of interviewing candidates, for example, for internships or anything. And as far as that effort, I know that our goal is to make sure we ask everyone the same questions and not focus too much on candidates' backgrounds, but like their skills and what the role entails, and as also to make sure we're evaluating everyone in the same way, by the same metrics. That's all I've got as far as how to handle it in the hiring situation.
No, that's great. And I think that definitely when you talk about numbers and recruiting and getting talent in the door, we kind of have to raise our voices and be heard. So how do you getting involved with recruiting is actually a way to advocate for diversity, but what are some other ways that we could advocate for diversity inside the workplace or even outside the workplace?
So I think that the first important step is kind of defining what diversity means for a company. So what diversity means to me might mean something different for Chad, So I think define diversity. What does that mean to you? What does it mean to me? What does it mean for our company ethos? And then come up with like a diversity plan of some sort. What are the steps in hiring and workshopping and recruiting and things like that? How are we going to achieve the definition of diversity that we've laid out? I think that you first have to figure out what diversity is, because it could be a wide range for a lot of people, right? So I think that's the first kind of step that can kind of make the rest of it a little bit smoother.
Great, thank you. Yeah, so it could be diversity, you're saying maybe not ethnicity, but maybe in skill set?
Yeah, in skill set and ethnicity. I mean, both.
Both.
Yeah, definitely.
Let's see, for this one, it's a tricky one. I think it's definitely important to understand how diversity is perceived at your company. But I think outside of the workplace, I think it's important to volunteer. There's a lot of initiatives and interesting initiatives happening outside that promote diversity. There's a lot of mentoring events. So volunteering for those, back when I was at TechCrunch, we had a big event on diversity. It was called Justice. And I volunteered for that event. The writer that was organizing it, I reached out to her and I was like, I think this is awesome. I want to help. So I think, doing those little things help. Outside of the workplace, inside of the workplace, it's quite different. It's quite different. I think it's a little too soon for me to talk about my company now because I've been there I started in January. But coming back to the unconscious bias, for recruiting, I know there's, I read this about this guy, Raphael, I forgot his last name. He is from IDEO. And he talks a lot, he writes about unconscious bias and he talks about it, and he was talking about tools that we can design to mitigate the problem. And one of those tools is a tool called Textio, and what it does is that they call it, I was checking out their site last night, it amplifies your writing, but it essentially it helps recruiters with composing job postings. So you're using the right language to attract people, diverse candidates. It was so cool, and I was like, we should probably start using this tool if you're definitely looking to have a diverse team in your company. So yeah, this is my 2 cents.
Yeah, no, that's interesting. It's a tech solution for the tech industry.
Absolutely.
For diversity and inclusion.
So, I don't have any, everyone's situation is different, but I think all of us should see what we're doing in the broader historical context. So, if many of us are isolated in tech and maybe could define our sphere of impact as just technology, but realize the work that you all are doing, even this event is tied to a greater history of a greater struggle for freedom that people of color in this country and the whole world have been engaged in for many, many years. I noticed on the way here that Spotify shares this building with the 32BJ and 1099 unions. Those 2 unions represent workers, the doormen and doorwomen, the home health aides, the home sort of healthcare workers, like the healthcare technicians, the folks that most people don't notice in the places they travel, but are overrepresented in the Black community and in the Latino community globally. And one of the big aha moments for me was to realize that all those workers in those unions are paying money into pensions, not necessarily at these particular unions, but certainly pensions at the state level that then invest that with venture capital into venture capital firms and other investment strategies. And the vast majority of those monies flow to investment managers who do not look like the workers who have contributed that money to the public pension fund. And so that was an aha moment for me because I made the connection between why my struggle in the venture capital industry and how it's connected to the broader struggle for fundamental fairness in that workers and people of color in this country have been engaged in and continue to be engaged in. Things like a basic living wage, basic human rights in the workplace. So this is a long way to say that if you're feeling like the only one, if you're feeling disconnected, you need to sort of get out of the tech bubble and look beyond to the broader struggle, and you will find a connection that I think renews your commitment to the work that you're doing around diversity. Because I know it did it for me.
Interesting connection there. Yeah.
Okay. I think as Angela mentioned, something you can do outside the workplace is volunteer and help out with hackathons or whatever is going on that would promote diversity and get more people involved from diverse backgrounds in technology. And as far as in the workplace, as I mentioned, I've been involved with recruiting efforts, and sometimes that means pointing out where there are gaps, perhaps. Like, for example, there's this big conference that happens annually. I don't want to mention it by name, but it's extremely expensive, and like it's at a different place every year. And almost exclusively, not exclusively, but a large amount of the interns we get every year, this is where we go and get our interns. I mentioned, look, well, this conference isn't accessible to a lot of people, and there are a lot of like local organizations that we could work with to try to get more interns, or like even the CUNY system, for example. I have connections there, and that's sort of where I helped like bridge that gap and say, hey, like, I'm going to introduce you to this person who works with this organization who happens to be like working with high school students looking for internships or whatever, or college students as well. What that results in, unfortunately, I have to say, is like sometimes I have to get involved and like, okay, well, do you want to volunteer for going to this hackathon? And I also feel like it's not always easy to get people outside of like the underrepresented groups involved in efforts like this. So that's definitely something we can talk about soon.
Yeah, thank you. And so let's talk about, there's this theme of enlisting others into this effort of increasing diversity in tech. How have you used your networks, either friends or coworkers or other professional groups, to improve diversity and inclusion within the tech industry? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, I last year, while I was still involved with hosting the Latinas in Tech community, I think BuzzFeed has been very supportive of the community from day one, and they're always offering like, how can we help? Let us know what we can do. So I asked them for money. I was like, we want to host these events. Like, here's how you can help us out. Like, sponsor our events so that we can get together and have that community. And also, the part of that is like having ERG. As far as like getting other people involved in like probably more difficult things, I think surprisingly people are willing to help. They just don't know how. And I think just like making them aware of those opportunities of how they can contribute their time and how they can get involved despite like not being a member of that community, because sometimes they feel like maybe this is a space for other people, and they're just thinking like, oh, I'm a white dude, well, what can I do? How can I be part of this? But people are actually surprisingly willing to help if you ask them. Great, thank you. So how have you used your networks in?
So I do a couple of things. I guess the most important thing is I don't know if I should say this in such a big audience, but I keep office hours, and with me, like cold outreach doesn't really work, but I will meet with anyone who's interested in getting to the venture business, particularly if you come from, and we share a background, whether that's school or more relevant, a cultural background. So I try to not be an open book, but be a resource for people who think my career path is interesting and want to learn about it and maybe pursue it. And then the other thing is I try to be a hub in all the networks I'm a part of. And part of being a hub means being astute about who you invite into the network. And so in sort of exercising that judgment about who should be in the network, you sort of better believe that I am looking for great talent from our communities to bring in to that network. And I've been able to do that in a number of networks that I'm a bit part of that have like really impacted network. Like the first 2 Puerto Ricans from the island to be in this network ever, or the first Puerto Ricans from the Bronx or Latinos from wherever to present at this pitch thing, or what have you. So those are the main things that I do.
So it seems like you use your network, and then you are a hub within your network. network.
Yeah. Well, yeah, because once we're connected, I probably cannot answer every question that you're going to ask me, and that is the value of a network, right? There likely is someone who can answer that question, and so I try to be helpful by putting people in touch with people in my network who can help another person solve a problem that I can only partially touch or not even touch at all.
Great, thank you. So
My background in education, I think, luckily enough, just the teaching community is really a place where people kind of just by nature want to help each other. So I've had a really fortunate experience just reaching out, asking for help. There's a lot of programs out there for young girls now to learn coding, free after-school programs, things like that. So it's just a matter of introducing other people to the right people, kind of a little bit of what Jorge said. And I kind of liked what Paola said about asking for help. I think as a co-founder, that's probably one of the biggest things I had trouble doing was saying, I need help, or can you introduce me to this person, or can you do this for me? It's tough for me to do that. And I think that when I've mastered doing that is when I've gotten the biggest payback, and I've been able to pass that on to others too.
great. So, how have you used your network to navigate diversity in tech?
I mean, this is going to sound a little bit selfish, but I mean, I've used my network to try to find opportunities, like make career changes and, make those connections, expand my network and try to find like the right company to work for. So, I mean, being Latina, I'm part of the diversity, so I guess I've used them in a selfish way, but I haven't really used them to promote diversity in any sense, I think. I think it's just good practice to go to meetups, meet new people. Recruiters are always at these meetups. There's always very interesting people to talk to. It's always, good practice to actually attend meetups or conferences that, where that speakers, that speakers that you look up to are going to attend and going to be speaking. So yeah, I mean that's mainly how I've been using networking. I think networking is definitely important professionally if you plan to grow professionally. I think that's definitely good advice for all the Latinos here. Networking is definitely a key.
Yeah. Although it may not be selfish, right? Because if you are breaking in and you're probably the first Latinx there, while going in there, you can, create the forums and create the networks within, right?
Okay,
Right.
I'm glad you made that comment because I think you have to look at your career over, a 20, 30-year time frame. And at certain points of your time, you're going to be extracting value from a network. At certain points of time that you're going to be adding to the value. My own personal philosophy is that at the end of the day, I want to be a net contributor, right? So if you look at the balance sheet, how much you take out of a network, how much you put into it, try to be a net contributor. And that's relevant because, if someone if you're someone who identifies as being Latinx and you're a net contributor to a network, that does a lot for all of us, right? For better or for worse, when we walk into a room and we're the only ones, we bear the image of the coqui, the nopal, the arepa, like all the cultures are on our face, right? And so if you're the sort of person in the network who leaves more value behind than she or he extracts, that contributes to the uplift and the image of our people.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think coming back to the network topic, one of the things that I've realized as I've gained more experience in my career is that it's important that if at some point in your career you get help from someone, you had a mentor, I think it's important to give back to the community, or if you meet a junior, in my case, I've met junior designers, or designers are starting to, starting their career. It's important to advise them in any way you can and help them in any way you can. So I don't know, it's kind of like karma. If you if you feel experienced enough to give advice to others, to take advantage of that and just really use your knowledge and transfer that knowledge to others.
Great. Great, thanks. And this is well, I don't know if you guys wanted to add anything else, but the comment was really a great segue into thinking about how we can pay it forward. You know, how can we mentor youth, right? Here we are trailblazing, you know, we may be the first ones on the scene and that are creating these networks and creating these communities. But what advice would you give someone young who's entering the tech industry? And there may be some people in the audience that are thinking, how do I go into the tech industry? So what advice would you give?
Wait, the question is, how do we pay it forward, or what advice do we give to people?
Let's start with what advice we would give people who want to come into the tech industry. We're going to then talk about paying it forward. Thanks for making that distinction.
I went to a meetup recently, and they talked about adaptability. So I think that's something that you learn as you work and as you gain experience. Learning to be adaptable is very important, even if you're young. Learning to speak up, learning to give feedback, learning how to communicate things. Having a network is important. I actually have a friend who, she's in Miami. She's actually looking to move here in New York, and she's in a very different industry. But as in tech, I think it's a given that you have to have a LinkedIn account, and that you have to have a network to be able to start working in tech. So I think I think that's a good start. There's a lot of hackathons, meetups, and things happening in tech, so taking advantage of that. There's a lot of free resources, free things that you can attend to and take advantage of that if you are in tech. I think we have that advantage over other industries. Companies are really willing to have free events and host events Spotify. Thank you. And yeah, I would say first thing to do is take advantage of those workshops, those boot camps, those things that are for free, because there are so many available right now that it's just on you to do it and to be successful and to enter the tech world.
Great, yeah.
So I actually recently just entered this whole tech world. I was a preschool teacher for the longest time, so this is still relatively new for me. And I think a good place to start, and this is kind of alongside what you said, is to find people to help you, find events like this, try to find a mentor, try to find someone who is smarter than you, better than you, who's been through the ringer. Don't be afraid to ask, can you give me an hour of your time once a month? Just things like that. But yeah, essentially what you said too.
Great. So advice for people who want to break into tech.
Well, I would say that Spotify is a great example. We're sitting here today, and it's a $25 billion by market cap company. But at some point, it was an idea on a whiteboard somewhere in Stockholm, and I think it was Stockholm. Anyway, the point is that tech is such an expansive sort of industry or part of the business world to engage in, right? And there are early stage companies, there are companies that are experiencing rapid growth, and there are companies that have sort of plateaued in growth but are very large, right? So my advice would be to look within yourself and try to become very highly self-aware about your strengths, your weaknesses, your values, the causes that you care about. Because the person who does really well in their job in a company that has 10 people or less is not necessarily the person who does well in a company that's growing rapidly and maybe has 200 employees and may hate and despise being in a company that has thousands of employees globally and that is publicly traded. And one of the things I've observed in people who really manage their careers in tech do well is that they really know where they fit. And they're really good about saying no to 99% of the opportunities, and they can spot that 1% opportunity that resonates with who they are as people, and they go out and do it. And that might be starting a company, or that might be joining a company that's growing quickly, or it might be interviewing with lots of other candidates for a role at a very large and established company. So self-awareness is critical in trying to get into the technology business.
Great, thank you. And Paola, I know you also made a switch into tech. So, what is your advice for those people doing that now?
I relied heavily on my network. I attended a lot of meetup events too. I saw a lot of panels like this one where I saw women doing this work, and I was super inspired by them. And I think beyond that, it's also make use of your network. As part of the meetup group, I still have a Facebook group for Latinas in tech, and women have gotten jobs through these connections, just like reaching out. I always share about like opportunities for like scholarships and different programs that might be out there. So also Techqueria does a great job. They have a Slack. They share resources as well. I think as far as like other skills, tenacity, I would say. I think especially learning how to code, it can be discouraging at times, and like you're interviewing and it's like rejection after rejection. And I think having that network there is also really important. But like I think sticking with it, which I think we brought up before, is something that like I think Latinos are very we're tenacious people just from our experience. I forgot what else I was going to say. Sorry.
It's okay. We can come back to it. We did have another question that we started with, which was, are we moving into the Q&A now? Oh, we are. Okay. Can we do one more quick question? Because we talked about bias, we talked about diversity, but there's really this big economic gap, which is the big elephant in the room, in everywhere in tech. You look at all the economic figures, and you can look at for example, Equal Opportunity Commission, the federal government agency that makes sure that there is diversity and inclusion all throughout. There's a report there and talks about the difference in pay, and we've seen some other reports about the difference in pay. So just a quick question about, how do we negotiate salary? What are some best practices that have worked for you to mitigate that gap in economics? And then we'll move into the Q&A.
Yeah, that's a big one. I would say, I think it all starts with like basic research to just like really understanding the market and see how much you could be worth based on your experience, based on what you know and your skill set. I think taking advantage of that network and talking to other peers or people that have your same profession might also be helpful. We're understanding how much you're getting paid and depending on the role, the company. But yeah, I think it's really, it all starts with like doing research and really understanding how much is like the the standard salary or like average salary for your role, and then kind of like using your experience and kind of like assessing how much am I worth based on what I know. I think basic start is just like research on what's out there.
Yeah, getting the data, arming yourself with data. Rebecca, what has
that's
worked for
actually
you?
exactly what I was going to say, is to arm yourself with the numbers as much as possible. And to be quite honest, I don't have a crazy amount of experience with salary negotiation, but in the few times that I've had, I think sometimes we get so focused on what somebody else is making and what they're doing, and I think that when you start that conversation, you want to really be focusing on what you're doing and your value proposition and what you bring to the table, and this is why you should be making this money, not what this person is making, what they're doing. Talk about yourself. I mean, if there's a time to toot your horn, it's in that moment.
Definitely.
Just be confident.
Yeah. So what have you found to be best practices that could be in?
Well, I would say know the data, but don't ask for sort of what everyone else is asking for. Ask for a lot more. Because
I like that answer.
Well, statistically, part of the reason the wage gap exists is because people who are Black or Latino tend to ask for less than what a white man or a white woman would ask for the same job. I had a mentor when I was making my transition from law into venture, and I was like, look, I just want to be reasonably paid for the value that I contributed. And it was like, don't be stupid. You want to be unreasonably compensated in relation to the value you contribute. Now, that is actually bad advice if you're going to join a startup or found a startup, because you need to be not short-term greedy when you do that. You need to be long-term greedy. But in everything else, you are probably going to, statistically speaking, underestimate your value to the market. And so my best practice, my advice is to know the data, know what is market, and add 10%, 20%. Ask your mentor, ask someone in the company who's championing your candidacy, someone who knows, how far you can go without looking insane, and try to test that limit. That's my advice.
Interesting, thank you. And Paola, what has worked for you?
So I have to agree with everybody who mentioned doing your research and knowing what you're worth, seeing like what's out there in the market. Have a number in mind before while you're job searching. That's like your minimum. Also, I have a couple of quotes that I was thinking about while people were speaking, but they're from Cindy Gallup, who's like somebody that I look up to because she's always talking about like get paid a lot of money. She's in the ad industry. One of them is, if all else fails, ask yourself, what would a white guy do? And another one is, ask for as much money as you can say out loud without bursting into laughter.
Wonderful advice. So I guess we are moving into the Q&A right now. Yes, everyone's shaking their head. Yes. So, question: what advice do you have for someone who wants to get into tech but doesn't necessarily have a technical background? So that's the difference, because we did talk a little bit about breaking in, but what if you have that gap? You don't have a tech background. Yes.
This is like my life in a nutshell. I mean, I still sometimes have days where I just feel like I have no idea what I'm doing. And I think the best thing is to, number one, surround yourself with people who do know what they're doing, who are in tech and have experience, and who are kind enough to lend you a hand. My best friend is in the front row right here, and she is in tech, and I'm like constantly slacking her and texting her with questions. So things like that. And also the internet is crazy. I mean, Google University has hours and hours and hours of free coding classes that are really easy to follow. Use the internet, use people around you, ask for introductions, and don't get frustrated, because tech is so, it's ever changing, it's ever evolving. There's such an ebb and flow. So you might feel like you really have a grasp on something one day, and then, I've come into the office and it's like, oh, that changed. It's been updated since last week. It took me 20 hours to learn. So just keep going.
Great.
Yeah, don't give up.
And we don't necessarily have to have the panelists answer each and every question, just so we have a chance for all of these Q&A questions to be answered, to give opportunity. But one more?
Yeah, so I have been an engineer for 3 years, but prior, I was an English major. I studied literature. I transitioned into engineering. It took a couple of years in total. I was working full-time as an admin, and I was taking on the weekends and evenings coding classes and working on projects with friends. And I think it's absolutely possible, and I think there are definitely more programs now and scholarships and stuff that are available to people who. I can think of one now. Coalition for Queens is a completely free, 10-month program.
Excellent.
That I went through. I was a part of the pilot program. So there are lots of opportunities like that you can hear about through friends. Definitely relying on the internet. I feel it's also one of the things I would suggest is find what works for you. Some people learn from books, some people learn from videos. All of that is out there. Just it's a matter of doing your research. If you're somebody who learns best in a classroom sort of setting, and you probably need a little bit more help directly from people. There's opportunities for that too. That's all.
Great, thanks. So we'll move on to the next question, which is interesting. Shall we apply the same strategy of bringing your kind to the workplace as other racial groups do, i.e., I guess, I don't know if that means Native Americans or Asian Pacific groups. I've never heard of that, but Leo, if you're in the audience, if you want to explain a little bit. I haven't really seen that. Has the panel seen that? Like bring Latinx to Workday? Is that?
Maybe it means like what this is like a, when people are looking to hire, they hire people like themselves. Like, and this is how you end up with like a tech bro environment. And I think part of it, like for example, so I have a friend who started recently at a new company, and she's looking to grow her team. And she reached out to me and she said, "Who do you know any like iOS devs that are Latinas who are hiring right now?" And like I think maybe that's what the question intended. Like, get your people in the door. I do that all the time. I refer as many like of my female friends and like people of color friends as I can anytime I make a referral for a position at my company now.
Great. Okay, thank you for that. Let's move on to the next one. How would you navigate not getting along or being with problematics, Latinx in your office when there aren't many of you? And that may happen. That may happen. What happens if not everybody gets along, but you're the handful of few? I don't know if any of you have experienced that or maybe have seen it in other organizations and can provide some insight into.
So I think that's a really good question, because the reality is that whether it's Latino, Latinx, Hispanic, the reality, those are terms that are trying to bring together, for whatever reason, disparate groups of people, right? And among any collection of disparate groups of people, there's often going to be conflict. And it reminds me of sort of the dynamic in the college I went to between island Puerto Ricans and Puerto Ricans who did not grow up in the island but grew up in urban centers in the US. There was lots of tension, lots of static around that. And the way we kind of got through that was to be more inclusive rather than less inclusive. Right, so it might mean if at your ERG at work you have to incorporate that person who gets on your nerves because she only wants to speak Spanish, and you got to hang up because you don't know how to, or your Spanish is shit, and you sort of have to include her, right? Because she wants, or it might mean that person's really loud and you don't understand why they're so loud. Maybe you come from a more like conservative, socially conservative country, and they're maybe Caribbean and they're mad loud. You may have to, no stereotypes at all. You may have to reach out to that person and find a way to coexist, if not work together. And so, I don't know if this is the advice the anonymous person asking the question wanted, but really try to get along and find common ground, even though you may not know where that is initially.
Great. Shall we move on to another one? So this is another variant into, how to help to break into the tech industry, but this person wasn't educated in the US. So how do you bridge that gap of, not speaking English and not being educated here and having that same educational standard? I don't know if any of you have experienced that or have had a coworker that was able to do that successfully.
Wow, yeah, that's a great question. I've known a few people that actually have had to, either transfer credits or kind of like redo their career somehow in, 2 years to be able to learn the language and kind of like have an actual diploma from here. So that's one option. Another option is there's a lot of, I think the language, you learn it as you speak it, as you immerse yourself into overall. You just not hang out with Latinos, and or if you do hang out with Latinos, you ask them to speak to you in English. And but I think there's a lot of if you're looking to, there's a lot of coming back. This is kind of similar to what we were talking about, where we touched on a little bit earlier, and it's really leveraging and taking advantage of all the online resources that are out there. There's a lot of free resources out there, and if you're looking to get into tech, take advantage of that. Take advantage of meetups. Take advantage of free workshops. Take advantage of conferences. I want to say that if you're trying to learn a new skill, Skillshare is awesome.
Skillshare,
Udacity
great tool,
is awesome. Coursera is awesome. Khan Academy, YouTube. There's a lot of like online resources out there where you can learn from, and actually, like, if you're disciplined, you can slowly start getting into tech. Hopefully that answers that anonymous question.
Great, thanks. Well, do we have time for one more? Yeah, all right. So let's see. We're scrolling around. Great. So what are some tips on how to get your company, who has a diversity and inclusion program, to be accountable for supporting you with initiatives raised in an ERG? That's a really good question. How do you get your company to really, put their money where their mouth is and to actually do it?
What's ERG?
Employee Resource Group.
I would say talk about the bottom line as much as possible, right? Leadership, at the end of the day, they care about increasing revenue. And we talked about arming yourself with data. If you can just consistently talk and drive home the fact that diversity increases revenue, we know this to be true, the bottom line is going to get better. I think that that's your best shot at making sure that people stay accountable, is to really keep talking numbers. People can talk about feelings and talk about community and all of those things, but at the end of the day, sometimes numbers are just more effective, I think.
Great. So what's the bottom line? Economics.
What's the bottom line?
Anyone else want to contribute to that?
Yeah, I think, you need to get some credibility to actually make it happen. So I think a way to make that happen is to come with a plan, right? If you're looking to drive an initiative that that's going to have a huge impact on your company, I think you have to come prepared with an initiative that has a good plan.
Great, great. And I think that concludes it for Q&A. And yes, we just want to thank all of you for coming. Thank you to all our panelists sitting here, Paola, Jorge, Rebecca, Angela. It seems like this is just one of many conversations. We hope you take some of the resources and tools that we've talked about here and apply it. Go to your companies, go to your organizations, help your coworkers, help your friends, create network and strengthen that community. And that's how we're going to be successful. So thank you to all of you. Thank you to Spotify, Catalina, Adriana, Maria, the rest of the team, Techqueria. Yo te quería, and I always will.
All right, don't go anywhere.
All right.
We do have something for you on behalf of Spotify. So we have
headphones. Thank you. Oh, wow. Wasn't expecting it. Wow.
Here you go.
Very nice.
And we have cards from Techqueria.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you.
I need a pair of these.
And just to reiterate here, so a big round of applause for the panel with energy, please, like we're awake. Awesome. Thank you so much for coming. I do want, this is something that I cannot stress enough, is that you need to value yourselves. We are an asset for every single company that you join, a real asset. And they are so fortunate and they should be so proud to have you as an employee. So remember that they need you more than you need the industry. So always keep that in mind and ask for what you need. Ask for what you want. Don't be afraid of asking. It's the best way to accomplish things in life. You just go, do it, get it. Right? Woo! We have like 40 minutes for you to network, get to know each other. Also, your network is your net worth. So make some friends, talk to people, and hang out. Thank you so much for coming. Big round of applause. There's beer, food, all of that fridge is for you. We got all that beer for you, so don't let it go to waste. I believe in you.
Sorry, and last thing again, just to remind you, go to our website, check out our future events. If you have any initiative ideas that you're like, oh, I feel like it would be super cool if this project existed, but I don't know how to do it, come to me and we can make it happen. What else? And yeah, see, keep participating. We'd love to have you here.
Also, Latinos at Spotify.com. You can also hit us up if you have any suggestions, any events that you would like us to do and host for you. Please let us know. As I said before, you're all in our list right now. So I'll be sending you invites to all the events we're going to be planning this year. All right? Thank you.
All right. Good job.